Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Scott Turow and Dave Barry.
Here we go.
Good afternoon, and thanks for coming. We can't believe people are still coming to these things. This is Scott's fifth panel. Scott will be doing his part of this totally in mime. But I wanted to start by, I'm going to tell you some things about Scott Turow, my friend and bandmate. And you all know that he's probably the most accomplished legal thriller writer of all time. And I'm sure you're familiar with this. If you didn't, before the last 3 days, you know everything about him now, including probably all have urine samples from Scott Turow. But there are two things you don't know about Scott. First of all, I performed his wedding. And I hope we can get into this at some point, discuss it, or maybe we can, but Scott got married last summer in Wisconsin and asked me if I would perform the ceremony. And I am a notary public in the state of Florida. Which in Florida it means anything. I can do anything in Florida. I can sentence people to death in Florida. Well, I didn't think it had a lot of legal standing in Wisconsin. But Scott wanted me to do it, and we got into this. I was only peripherally involved because Scott sent me all the emails, but the New York Times wanted to cover this wedding, and he told them that I was going to perform the ceremony, and the Times jumped on that. Like, that seemed like a Watergate-level scandal. Like, what do you mean Dave Barry is going to perform your wedding in Wisconsin? And Scott, because he's a lawyer, proved to them, to the satisfaction of the New York Times anyway, that I could, in fact, legally perform. You want to briefly give your reasoning for that, the legal?
Well, it's late in the day, and it's really soporific, but
okay,
Wisconsin
never mind. We won't. No, go ahead, Scott.
That doesn't matter. Wisconsin has a provision that allows for what's called self-solemnizing marriages, meaning it's just an exchange of vows. But the guy at the New York Times, the editor, I mean, this is his business, right? So he knows all of these laws. He says, well, that only applies if the religion in question allows for self-solemnizing weddings. So one of the great things about being Jewish is there's always something you don't know about being Jewish. And it turns out that the Jewish faith is one that allows for self-solemnizing weddings. It's the exchange of vows between the bride and the groom, or the bride and the bride and the groom, whoever it is, that consecrates the marriage in the presence of a rabbi or any other presiding official, even Dave Barry, is not material to whether the marriage has been formed.
Doesn't self-solemnizing sound like an illicit sexual act?
The one thing I have not confessed to Dave yet, however, is that 2 days before the wedding, Adriane and I went to the Kenosha County Courthouse and said, we're here to apply for our marriage license. And they said, oh, you had to come in 6 weeks ago. So despite the elegance of Dave's ceremony, and the fact of the matter is that the Barry family business for generations has actually been his ministers. And so you would think he'd be all laughs. He's certainly the funniest human being I know, but Dave took it seriously. He did take it seriously, and he was wonderful at it.
Except you have to admit that there was a point in when I had you, you have them at your mercy. You say, repeat after me, and they do. And and I had Scott repeat, and this is something that Scott routinely does in our band, the Rock Bottom Remainers. I had him repeat the words, "Wild thing, you make my heart sing." You make everything groovy. Wild thing. And he did. Just like a trooper, repeated those words.
I do whatever Dave tells me to do. I'm so grateful to be in this band that, when he tells me to sweep up afterwards, I thank him.
Yeah. So the other thing you don't know about Scott Turow, and it's also related to the band, is that he has no spleen. And
They're concerned, Dave.
yeah, this is not a recent development. He got here without a spleen, so. But the way I found this out was typically when the Rock Bottom Remainders perform, right afterward we go to a bar. And so we had performed in New York City, and we went to a bar, and I found myself sitting between Scott Turow on my right and Roy Blunt Jr. on my left, both guys I like to listen to. And I had a few dozen, I can't remember what they were, but
Beverages.
And so I was, not like focusing too well, but I'm listening to, Roy is telling this long, funny story, which I'm trying to listen to, but Scott is over here telling this really kind of detailed thing about his spleen. And I'm listening in, and I'm like, I finally said, I kind of interrupted and said, wait, do you have a spleen or don't you? And Scott said, no, I don't. And then he goes back to say, okay. And then I'm listening to Roy for a while, and I'm hearing more from Scott, and it sounded to me like he had a spleen. So I said, wait, you say you don't have a spleen? He goes, no, I don't have a spleen. That's the point of this, All right, and then I go back to listening to Roy for a little while. And then I'm listening to Scott again, and I'm swearing he's talking like a man with a spleen, So I said a third time, I thought you said you don't have a spleen. He's Dave, I don't have a spleen. Then he pulled up my sleeve and got out a Sharpie and wrote, no spleen, in big letters on my arm. So we all go off to bed. It's late, and we have an early train to go to Boston from New York. So I met up really early in the hotel, and I stagger toward the bathroom, and I look in the mirror, and I see there's something written on my arm. And I have no memory of how that got there. And this is absolutely true. And I look down, and it says, no spleen on my arm. And you know that urban legend about the businessman who wakes up in a hotel and his kidney has been harvested. And just for a horrible moment, I thought, oh shit, somebody harvested my spleen. But here's the thing. I didn't know how to check because I, to this day, don't know where my spleen is. Scott doesn't know where his is either, just for the record. But then, as my
I
brain...
actually have pictures of mine.
He has, okay. Perhaps you can show them to the group later. But then my brain started to reboot, and I realized you don't really need a spleen. People are always having their, physicians remove your spleen for recreational purposes. You don't have to have a spleen. You have to be an idiot to harvest a spleen. In the organ harvesting community, is like an expression. He's so dumb he'd harvest a spleen, And so anyway, those are my two facts that you don't know about Scott Turow. And now I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and I'm just going to nod off here.
Yeah. So actually, Dave did marry us, and he really did a magnificent job of it, although I was somewhat taken aback a few months before the event where he sat me down. He said, all right, now I really want you to tell me what you want. And he was, very serious about it, and I thought about this, and Dave has a wonderful marriage to Michelle Kaufman, a fine sports writer in Miami, and I realized, there's a reason he takes this seriously. It's, his marriage has added a great deal to his life, and I think he had the same hopes for us, and indeed that's how it's worked out. So I was grateful for not just the banter, but also the soul. And to some extent, this was reciprocal, although it was between Dave and a dear friend of ours who was a Roman Catholic priest. And actually, Father John performed a benediction afterwards. But we both thought, Dave had the requisite stuff. But I actually had performed the wedding of Dave's brother, Sam, who was also a member of the band, and his unfortunately late wife, Kathy Kathy Kamen Goldmark, who was the founder of the Rock Bottom Remainders, who put all these writers together with musical aspirations and in all cases but one, some musical talent. So they had asked me, for God knows what reason, if I would perform their wedding. But in the city of San Francisco, where they were married, literally anyone can marry anybody to any creature. So, and as a result, there are in some, you can go down to City Hall in San Francisco and see that some people have been married by their dog, and there's literally a paw print on the license. So I guess that Kathy and Sam decided that, I might have been as good as a dog, and they asked me to perform this wedding, and I did get ordained in the Universal Life Church.
Did you really?
Yeah, in order to do this, yeah, I didn't re-up, but I paid my $50, but it was a second marriage for each of them, and it was a great wedding. We were talking about it last night. It was just a wonderful wedding. Celebrations went on for several days, and but I get up there and I look out, and Kathy knew every musician in the city of San Francisco, and just a wonderful cast of characters from all swaths of Bay Area life, and I saw people I hadn't seen in decades. But I look out at this assembled true multitude, and I say, well, this is the first wedding you have ever been at where the officiant is more nervous than the bride and groom. And from underneath the chuppah, because it was a Jewish wedding, Kathy's voice pipes up and says, well, that's because we've both done this before. So whenever you try to get Dave to be serious, it's really a waste of time. But I do want to, since we're here at a writers' festival, I did want to ask people to focus on one thing, which is we all know funny people. And granted that Dave Barry is the funniest single human being that I know, but what we don't tend to think about very much is most of those people can't get it on the page. And what Dave does, not only when he's in person being incredibly funny, but the reason you're all here to listen to him and his sidekick is because of what he is able to do on the page. And he actually sweats bullets over, in the old days, his columns and whatever else, his wonderful year-end review. If you haven't read Dave's summary of 2017 or 2016, I encourage you to go online and read it. He is a great writer, and people don't often think about that because, none of us except Dave can remember a punchline 10 minutes after we've heard a joke. So there's a certain kind of ephemeral nature to humor. And yet, great humor writers like Mark Twain,
who's here also, but
he was also a member of the band.
He lives in Rancho. Yeah.
He's also a member of the band.
Yeah.
They have a certain amount of skill. So, if you wanted to actually riff on what it was like to be a writer, that would be probably interesting. The other thing that people don't know about Dave or don't think about is that he is a journalist, and he is a person of, like all great journalists that I've known, of almost infinite curiosity. There's the oddities of human behavior and human circumstance are endlessly fascinating to him. And a lot of what goes into those wonderful columns or pieces or books is actually a good deal of reportage. And he is, I don't know of, how many Olympics have there been that you haven't attended?
I've been to a lot of them, not as a competitor, but I've been to a bunch, yeah.
I mean, and he's gone all over the world and done screwy things, but he's a really serious first-class journalist.
But what I was always, and I will blow smoke up Scott's ass in a minute, just as he's been done to me here. But we're not going to keep doing that. Talk about how great we are, okay? No, you can't do that.
Hey, it's the end.
I know, yeah, we're done. The thing about it, the reporting thing, I did start out as a newspaper reporter, and that really has helped me immensely in my humor career. I think it's a lot easier to make fun of the news and the conventions of journalism if you used to have to follow them. But also, I was not I wasn't that good at reporting, at journalism. The part where I was okay at observing, but the part where and this is what always stopped me really as a reporter, was the interacting with people. Like when you're a reporter, the writing is a minimal part of what you do. Most of what you do is talk to people. You call them up, you're bugging them, you're nagging them, or you're talking to people who are hostile or intimidating. And to be good at journalism, you have to be good at that. You have to be able to focus when people are really angry at you or unhappy with the mere fact of your existence. And I was terrible at that. And I would be reminded of it sometimes. Like I say, I made a point over the years, and I still do, of going to news events, not just writing about them, but actually going and watching them before I try to write about them. And I always go to the Iowa and New Hampshire, the caucus and primaries. They go to the conventions. These are wonderful sources of humor. Terrible way to elect people to run the country, but terrific sources of humor. But I would be reminded, I'll give you my low point example of why I'm so glad I stopped being a reporter. Because every now and then I'll find myself in a clot of journalists at a real news event. And this was in New Hampshire in 1992. And every day I was writing a column about the New Hampshire primaries. And so I had to think of something every day. So one day, you just look at the schedule and see who's in town, who's around, who's doing what. I decided to spend a day following then First Lady Barbara Bush around, not as a stalker, but as a member of the press corps with the First Lady. And she was in town, going all over New Hampshire to campaign on behalf of her husband, then President George Bush, the first one. And it was a big deal, big motorcade, big entourage of New Hampshire politicians and the Secret Service and everything, and then a press bus full of real Washington reporters and me. And I'm like, in the back of the bus. And I love that. I love watching it all happen and not having to be part of it. I can make fun of it, but I don't have to deal with it. I don't have to pretend that I care, or get anything right. I can just make stuff up. So we go all around, and at the end of the day, there's this big rally in a hotel in, I think, Nashua, New Hampshire, and packed ballroom, all these speeches. Mrs. Bush comes on last, makes this big speech, big thing. And then, when I thought it was all over, the photographer who'd been with us for the whole day, Herb, brings up the press corps on the stage with Mrs. Bush. And it's like a sort of a quiet moment, and he puts us in a semicircle, and he brings the First Lady over, Barbara Bush, and puts her right next to me. So I've gone from lurking in the background where I'm comfortable, suddenly I'm on stage in a hotel full of people, and this press corps, and Mrs. Bush, First Lady of the United States, is right next to me. And that's a situation where I know in my mind to say nothing, just smile, you're honored to be there. Don't make a fool of yourself. But your brain is not always alert, the rest of your body as to the plan. And I look down and I see my mouth is moving. And I said to Barbara Bush in this loud, perky voice, and she doesn't know who I am, we've never met her, she has no idea, I'm just a guy in a photograph with her. I said, I shop at the same supermarket as your son Jeb. And I have no idea why I decided, just like you're just nervous and you want to say something. And I said that, and it's true at the time. I did. This is before he became governor of Florida. I shopped at the same public supermarket as Jeb Bush. But I don't think the first lady was dying to know that, I don't think she's saying, I wonder if he shops at the same supermarket with anybody I know. But I informed her of that fascinating fact, and she goes, well, who gives a shit? Not with her mouth, with her eyes. She said that. This is all true. This really happened. And then what she says with her mouth is, "Oh, we just celebrated Jeb's 39th birthday." And if you think about these two statements, they have almost nothing to do with each other except the word Jeb. So clearly, what was happening, it was that Mrs. Bush was being gracious. She's a very gracious lady. And she recognized immediately what was happening. The person in front of her has been reduced to a blithering idiot because she's Barbara Bush, and blurted out. It's probably happened to her all the time. She was making it look like we were having a conversation, which we weren't. I mean, how could you have a conversation about what I had said? And I knew that's what was happening. I'm like, oh God, I can't believe I said that. Thank you, Mrs. Bush. And so that's what I'm thinking with my mind. And then I look down and see to my horror, my mouth is thinking, whoa, we were really hitting it off here. And I said to Barbara Bush, the first lady of the United States, following up on the fascinating fact that I shopped the same supermarket as her son Jeb, I said, he's very tall. This is the conversation I had with Barbara. And she says, well, it didn't just grow this year. And then really, all of this really happened. And then the photographer took the picture, and then thank God it was over, except I had to endure the ridicule of my fellow journalists, on the long bus ride back to the hotel, marveling at my interviewing technique, speculating on what I would have asked Lee Harvey Oswald if I had the opportunity. But anyway, that really is, and I really appreciate your pointing out that I really do like to report. I like to go see things, but I do not like to interact too much. I like to just watch. Well, okay, so I have a question for you, sort of related to that. You still practice law?
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, yeah. But how much? And let's say somebody in this room, for example, wanted to hire you. Is that possible?
Yeah, it's possible.
All right.
Depend how much money they had.
Yeah. But, a lot in this room.
Yeah, no bars here, right. So I wrote Presumed Innocent. I'd been a prosecutor. I left the U.S. Attorney's Office and finished it in the summer in between the time that I was in government service and went into private practice. And the book ended up being bought by Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and Roger Straus the Younger, who I still think of as my publisher. This is Roger Straus III. Flew out to Chicago because he said he had to meet me. Now, I have to tell you that throughout my life as a would-be novelist, I had submitted novels to Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and I'd gotten many rejections from them. Some nice, some not so nice. When I was still in college, Michael DeCapua, who was the editor-in-chief there, took the time to write me a paragraph about a book that I had submitted, and I did put the publishing house on a kind of a pinnacle. And so here's Roger Straus III, and he gets on the phone and he sort of screams in the phone, "Where have you been all these years?" And of course, the answer is knocking on your goddamn door. But at any rate, he came out. We had a wonderful lunch. He remains a really dear friend. He's a terrific person. And as we were in this cab going back to the Sears Tower, where my law office has been, it's now called the Willis Tower, but it's still the same office. And Raj says to me, he says, "Just promise me one thing." And I said, "What's that?" He says, "Don't quit your day job." I said, "Why?" And he began to tell me that you know, he thought the book was going to be very successful, and he's seen many people ruined by sudden success. And I really took what he was saying to heart. And in simple terms, it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I'd managed to write this novel while working full-time. Yeah, I'd had a spell away from the law to finish it, but I liked being a lawyer, which, you know, many lawyers don't, but I still found it really interesting. And I sort of wanted to go through the experience that I could see descending on me, which is literally going from being somebody writing on the commuter train and in, you know, the unfinished basement of the house I was living in, to suddenly being the author of this mega hit bestseller, you know, about to be turned into a movie. I did want to go through that time with sort of that rudder of what I had always done. And I'd just gone into private practice, and I had not done any civil litigation. I thought it would be interesting to learn about it. And I went along that way, started my second novel. I was lucky in the sense that my private practice took off very quickly. And the summer that Presumed Innocent came out, I tried 6 different cases. And I was really, really busy. And it was about 9 months after this, and I was in a hotel in Kansas City. And why this made any difference, I mean, this is not logical, but the guy on the other side in the case, one of these big cases, it was Northrop versus Boeing, and lots of lawyers. But so one of the guys on the other side walks in, and he says, you know, I just saw the paperback of Presumed Innocent on sale downstairs in the, you know, the drugstore in this courthouse. And why this was so striking to me, I can't begin to tell you, but all I know is I was so damn busy as a lawyer that I didn't even know the paperback was coming out, because I hadn't been home long enough to even see what was in my mail. And I said, I'm doing something wrong. And I went to my partners and said, look, I need more time to write. I don't want to quit, but I need more time to write. And they were very accommodating then, and they have been for the next 30 years. And they've made it really possible for me to do this. By now, I practice very little law. Most of what I do and have done for the past 20 years is mostly pro bono. Right now, the firm has gotten a project together, which I think is a good one, to try to find a way to relieve the burden of a felony conviction on people who've had a blameless life since they left prison. And fortunately, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office has established a procedure for that. And so that's what I'm working on now.
Do you ever go into a courtroom anymore? Or do you ever, like, object?
I haven't.
And they go, yeah, it's sustained. He's Scott Turow.
Yes, I was in court as recently as about 9 or 10 months ago. And, you know, it was a silly little case. But, of course, it's not silly and little when you win, which we did. Yeah. So, but, I mean, I was a reasonably good trial lawyer. I wasn't, you know, I've seen some people who are utterly magical in the courtroom. I wouldn't say I was, but I certainly had my chops. And, you know, I had a great lesson when I started from the U.S. Attorney, a man named Tom Sullivan, who remains a dear, dear friend and is still practicing law well into his 80s. And he says, young lawyers make the mistake of thinking that cases are won by you know, their magic and their oratorical skills or their genius on cross-examination. Cases, he said, are won by the facts. It's exactly as it should be. And your job as a lawyer is to develop the facts and put them in front of whoever is deciding the case, a judge or a jury. And if you learn how to do that in a relatively clear-headed way, you can be a pretty good lawyer, and you can be pretty effective in a courtroom. And you may not win style points, but you'll win cases. And I thought that advice was really, really good.
When you're in court, did anybody ever acknowledge who you are? Like, does that ever come up?
Well, if I hear, I signed an amicus brief this week, and the other side was objecting to this amicus brief being filed. And it was a brief signed by a number of former prosecutors. And they went down the whole list of prosecutors, and that's, Joe Blow, Northwestern Law School, so-and-so, former assistant state's attorney. When they get to me, they got writer of fiction about lawyers. And if I have heard that line once from opposing counsel, I have heard it 800 times, and everybody thinks they're so original. Mr. Turow, an author of fiction,
well, you're not bitter at all, are
has
you,
written
Scott?
some more.
He's not bitter at all.
No, so anyway, yeah, and it's an issue with some judges. I've had to be, some judges you walk in their courtroom and some judges have to be the most important person they've ever met. And so it's, for whatever reason, my presence seems to have set them off. I can think of one case where I told the client, get another lawyer. This judge is just never, we can't get rid of the judge, and this judge is never going to be happy with the fact that I'm there. But by and large, my great advantage is that I practice law in the same community where I came of age. And so a lot of the people who I appear in front of, I've had some contact with during the course of my career, and they knew me first as a lawyer, and they're fine with me. Weirdly, for many years, I didn't think about this at the time, but there was a criminal defense lawyer in Chicago named Sherman Magidson, and in addition to being a wonderful criminal defense lawyer, Sherman, for years, wrote The Young and the Restless. And he would try cases and work like a demon, but every day he got his pages in for The Young and the Restless.
And he got a lot of clients off on amnesia defense.
That's right. Oh, I'm really your father defense. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course, Scott.
So,
my legal career, just so you know, consists of getting out of jury duty many times in Dade County, Florida.
So let's go back to your becoming a journalist, because there are certain blank spots in my knowledge of your life. You come out of Haverford College in 1969.
Yeah.
Right? It's draft era, so what did you do?
I became a conscientious objector. I did, and my draft board assigned me to 2 years. You're supposed to do 2 years of what they service, and you do what your draft board tells you. They had me become a bookkeeper for the Episcopal Church. So I did. I filled out expense reports or whatever. I was a bookkeeper for 2 years, and it was incredibly boring. So I wanted to become a newspaper guy. So when I was done with the 2 years.
Now, had you written like for the college paper?
Yes, I wrote for the Haverford College paper what I thought were hilarious columns. And then years later, when I had become a successful syndicated columnist, there was a reunion, like my 25th reunion or something at Haverford College. And somebody had come up with a brilliant idea. There was this like dance in the gym. They came up with the idea of blowing up a bunch of they got my columns and blew them up. So all around the gym were these columns I'd written in the 60s that I just thought hilarious when I wrote them. And they were awful. There must have been so many drugs involved that I thought they were funny enough to write that anybody thought they were funny enough to print. So it was a lesson to me that sophomoric is is a real problem, and I was.
With being a sophomore.
So, yeah. So that anyway, then after that, I went to work at the Daily Local News in Westchester, Pennsylvania. It sounds like the newspaper Superboy delivered, right? The Daily Local, and it was a little town, Westchester, Pennsylvania, and it was daily, except for unless you counted Sunday as a day. We didn't do that, but local. It was very local. Like if a local resident grew a tomato that looked like Dwight Eisenhower, you know. Is Susan here? I shouldn't probably. That we would take a picture of it and put it on the front page of the Daily Local. So it small town paper, but it was excellent experience for me. I learned everything I need to know about journalism in like a couple of months at the Daily Local News. Because if you're covering the local school board, if you're writing obituaries, going to fires, you do everything at a small town paper, and you make every possible mistake. You learn that if somebody says his name is John Smith, you ask them how to spell John and how to spell Smith. No, you do. It turns out you'll inevitably get that kind of thing wrong, and they'll be mad at you. But that's how I got started. And I loved it. I really loved it. It was horrible pay, but it was the most fun job I ever had. And I sort of stayed with newspapers forever. But as I say, because I didn't really like the part where you had to talk to people, I went over to the part where you just make everything up, which I was a pioneer in that. Now a lot of people are doing that, I think. But I started doing that early on.
So you once said to me that in order to be funny, you've got to take chances.
Yes.
So I would like you to recount, say, the three biggest times that the chances didn't quite work out.
Oh man, well, it's kind of hard to say that because like the thing about writing humor is that it never works for everybody. Anything you write that you think is funny, inevitably a certain percentage of your audience is going to not think it's funny, and even another percentage is going to want you fired for, right? And I learned that early on. There's a group of people out there, I call them the humor impaired. And every column I ever wrote, I would get corrected. And I would think you can't possibly not know that I'm kidding here. Like, I went to Paris once, and I wrote some columns about it so I could deduct it on my income tax. That's not a joke. And one of the throwaway line in one of them, among the sights to see in Paris are the Louvre, the Arc de Triomphe, and the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Just a dumb joke and hard to believe anybody, So I'm not kidding, hundreds of letters about that circled, call yourself an expert, and so, and the Leaning Tower of Pisa is located in Pisa, which is a city in Italy. So all of those people who had return addresses, I wrote back, and I said, you are mistaken. The Leaning Tower of Pisa was moved to Paris in 1978. And I got a letter back from, her name was Mrs. Herbert Harder of Denton, Kansas, who had a copy of her original letter to me, a copy of my letter back there with that statement circled, and the statement, Mr. Barry, I checked with my travel agent. And so you can't win. But, so, there's really there's no three simple answers, but every single thing I've ever tried has failed with somebody, sometimes more so than other times. Now, speaking of failing, can we talk about sex?
I knew you were going to get there.
Have you talked about to the folks here yet about testimony or not?
Yeah, we did. Linda Fairstein and I did, very early this morning.
Okay.
We were out with the birds and the sunrise worshipers.
Well, Scott has a wonderful book out right now called Testimony, and it's it's a really interesting book that you will not ever begin to guess you could make a legal thriller out of this particular topic. But sex.
Yes.
In there, And I've written a couple of novels, and I always, there have been times I thought about writing a sex scene, and I just got too embarrassed to be just sitting there, you know. And you put sex scene in your...
Yeah, I put sex scenes in a lot of my novels.
Right, okay, well,
Yeah,
that's,
so-
I was noting the...
Yeah, so I said to Dave last night, he was like, we were walking back to our hotel rooms, and he says, one of the things I want to ask you tomorrow is about writing sex scenes. And I said, well, don't ask me if I get aroused while I'm doing it. And he
Well, see, he brought it right up, didn't he?
and he...
It's a little play on words. I'm a professional.
And he looks at me and he says, you got to know right now that was a mistake to say that. So...
By the way, talk about it. Because try to picture yourself writing, knowing that thousands and thousands of people are going to read it, writing about having sex.
Well, I mean, it's part of life, right? Matter of fact,
So there are a lot of things that are part of life we don't write about, Scott. There's no bathroom scenes in Testimony.
I beg to differ.
No,
but
that's right.
anyway, there is a point where the main character urinates on himself.
No, that's-
So, and
okay.
he does see fit to mention that.
Not in a
and
bathroom,
he goes
but
around,
anyway.
goes around with his wet trousers for quite a while. So there are bathroom scenes.
But
too.
do you feel self-conscious when you're doing it? I mean, writing about sex.
You know, I probably feel less self-conscious than other people do, because a lot of people want to skip it. I thought that the reactions to the particular scenes in Testimony were interesting to me, in the sense that, I think Linda was being serious this morning when she was praising these scenes, and Ben McIntyre, who happens to be here, reviewed the book for the New York Times Book Review, and he was not persuaded by these sex scenes. And the biggest chance you're taking when you write about sex is that it is really unique, which is what makes everybody curious about it. But what was one person's fantasy and what turns one person on, is not going to be very interesting to somebody else. And that is the chance that you are taking. But and my editor, Deb Futter, was a little uncomfortable with these scenes, and frankly, they were a little more explicit, but there were details that Deb, she would cross it out, and I'd send back the next draft, and I'd put it, back
Would you
in.
put it back in, would you?
And she would cross it back out, and she finally won the sex toy debate. So, but, I guess I enjoy it.
Well, I think it's very brave. I admire it. So we have like a couple minutes. Does anybody have any questions for Scott?
There's one question back
Yeah.
there. Yes, ma'am. Your taste must be flawed, but you liked 1L? Well, thank God you liked 1L.
1L was Scott's first book.
This is a book I wrote about being a law student, and the book was published in 1977, so it's 41 years later, and it's still in print. So yeah. Well, no, but see, this is a
Are
common.
you his mom?
1L was a good experience for me. It was not the basis of the movie The Paper Chase, which was based on a book by John J. Osborne, which of the same name, The Paper Chase. And the first review of 1L was written in my local hometown paper, the newspaper I grew up reading, the Chicago Sun-Times, and that review was written by John J. Osborne. And he hated everything about 1L. and he not only, when he got done insulting me, he took off on my ex-wife. And it was that was my entree into the great literary world, was lying on my living room floor after reading this review and groaning. But, you know, being reviewed, by the way, is a hard part of being a writer.
Do you read? I don't read reviews.
See, there you go.
And the only ones I read is like somebody sends it's a really great review. I'll read it, but I can't. One bad review takes away 100 good reviews, and for me, it just makes you just think about the bad review. And
I become philosophical about them, and I don't. You know, often Adriane will say, don't read this one. It's just not.
But that's almost as bad. You know.
Nah, I take the advice. It'll just irritate me. Yeah, I mean, what I think is that if you keep hearing the same remark again and again from review after review, you can take from that the fact that you made a mistake. Of course, these days, you know, the reviews written by critics stand side by side with the reviews written by readers. And in some ways, those are more consequential in terms of the sales of a book or that important factor.
But it's genuinely terrifying to read. Like in Amazon reviews, I tell authors don't do it because it'll be like 1 star. This book, I ordered this book on such and such a date, and it took 11 days, and the package was ripped, and it's like 1 star. Like, I had nothing to do. I don't deliver the freaking book, lady, you know? Anyway, we're out of time. Let's give it up for Scott Turow.